There is a paradox so grotesque, so historically dissonant, that we often forget it ever happened. The 17th century, the century that gave us modern philosophy, the seeds of science, reason, empiricism, rationality, was the very same century in which human beings were dragging their neighbors into public squares, stripping them bare, breaking their limbs, and setting them on fire for the crime of witchcraft. Imagine it. Somewhere in Europe, a student was reading Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am, for the first time, holding René Descartes' freshly printed pages in his trembling hands, and less than a mile away, the air filled with the putrid stench of burning flesh, the sound of chains, the clamor of a crowd convinced that Satan walked among them. For a few short decades, the rationalist and the witch were both haunted species, two shadows cast by the same historical sun, one rising, one falling. This is the story of how modern thought was born beside the witch pyre, of how philosophers, jurists, theologians, and yes, inquisitors responded to one of the darkest intellectual catastrophes in human history. I'm your narrator, and welcome to this exploration, where we examine the arcane threads woven beneath the tapestry of philosophy, religion, and esoteric history. Music rises, then softens. Before we turn to the philosophers themselves, we need clarity on something. What exactly was a witch? Because the witch burned across early modern Europe was not the folk healer, nor the herbalist, nor the cunning woman of older traditions. No. The witch of the witch trials was a legal invention, a theological construction, centuries in the making. Magic had long been a sin in Scripture, but it wasn't until the late 14th and 15th centuries that inquisitors honed it into something else entirely. A heresy, a monstrous global conspiracy engineered by theologians, demonologists, and legal scholars obsessed with the devil's alleged war against Christendom. And by the late 15th century, this elaborated theory of witchcraft had crystallized. What did it include? A pact with Satan, sex with demons, often incestuous, always degrading, aerial flight to the witch's Sabbath, signing one's name in a book of blood, the slaughter of infants for ointments, magic aimed at destroying fertility, society, the church, and eventually the entire world. To the demonologists, this wasn't rumor, this wasn't metaphor, it was a cosmic, apocalyptic battle, and witches were Satan's final army before the end times. The tragedy, of course, is that there is no evidence these witch covens ever existed, not as described, not even remotely, which makes the witch trials not just a moral nightmare, but a philosophical one, because the people who died were Christians, mostly women, mostly elderly, poor, socially isolated, often struggling with dementia, grief, illness, or simple misfortune. The single greatest predictor of being executed as a witch was not magical ability, but poverty. And yes, many thinkers saw it. Many knew something was wrong, but very few had the courage to say it. Let us meet the voices that did, and the ones who remained silent, and the ones caught in between. Our first figure stands at a strange intersection. Cornelius Agrippa, a name forever linked to Hermeticism, Kabbalah, occult philosophy. The very things inquisitors claimed witches practiced. Agrippa believed witches existed. He believed pacts with demons happened. He affirmed traditional demonology, but he also knew injustice when he saw it. In 1519, in the city of Metz, he defended an accused witch, an unnamed woman, like so many, who vanished into ash. She had been tortured, deprived of food and water, condemned on forged evidence. Agrippa exposed the inquisitor as corrupt, vengeful, and theologically incompetent. He challenged not merely the process, but the very reasoning of the Malleus Maleficarum, the infamous hammer of witches. This was dangerous. Defending a witch meant that if she were convicted, you shared her sentence. It didn't matter. Agrippa stood beside her anyway. It's unclear whether she survived. The records grow silent, as records often do when the powerless meet the machinery of fear. But the moment matters, because even the occult philosopher, the man who believed in demons, recognized the system had gone mad. Then comes the man who took skepticism further, Agrippa's student, Johann Weyer, a physician, a scholar, a man whose medical training made him see what demonologists could not. Weyer believed these women were not sorceresses, but patients. He described a condition called melancholia, hallucinations, delusions, memory loss, confusion between dreams and waking life, voices that command and torment. Weyer wrote that inquisitors were torturing people already drowning inside their own minds. Sigmund Freud would later call his work one of the 10 most important books ever written, and yet, in his own time, Weyer was accused of serving the devil. Because if you deny the devil's power, in an age of fear, people assume you must be in league with him. Next, we turn to Reginald Scot, whose discovery of witchcraft in 1584 remains one of the most remarkable works of skeptical philosophy ever printed. Scot did something few dared. He laughed at the absurdity, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. He saw how communities weaponized suspicion against those they disliked, how women who begged for food became scapegoats when cows died or crops failed. And he dismantled demonology, piece by piece. Biblical sorcerers were not the same as the witches imagined by inquisitors. Torture produced the confessions inquisitors wanted, not truth. Acts attributed to witches, poisoning, theft, violence, were already crimes, without needing demons. Yet Scot also wielded humor with lethal precision. Witches poisoned people, said his opponents, to which Scot replied, yes, and that is called murder, is it not? Punish the deed, not the delusion. Scott's book was hated by King James I, who ordered it burned. But ideas, once released, do not burn easily. Then comes Michel de Montaigne, traveling through Germany at the height of the craze. He met accused witches. He read their confessions, and he concluded something blasphemous for the time. People lie. People exaggerate. People dream, and confuse dreaming with truth. He suggested giving these women hellebore, a herb for mental illness, instead of hemlock, the herb for execution. A small suggestion, a monumental shift. Now we arrive at Francis Bacon, often credited as the father of the scientific method. Bacon was nuanced. He didn't deny witchcraft outright, but he insisted on evidence. If a woman claimed she could fly to the Sabbath, then show him the flight. He noted stories of hallucinogenic ointments that created sensations of floating, and even proposed better recipes, as only Bacon would. He viewed witchcraft not as a moral apocalypse, but as an epistemological error, a mistake in how people come to believe things, punish deception, perhaps, but not with fire. And then, Descartes, the man whose philosophy divided mind from body, creating the dualistic framework that would define modernity. Descartes said little publicly about witches or demons. He was cautious. Galileo had been condemned, and Giordano Bruno burned alive, but the implications of Descartes' system were devastating to demonology. If mind and matter are distinct, if imagination is not perception, if clear and distinct ideas are the foundation of truth, then magic, demonic possession, sorcery, all collapse under the weight of his method. In private conversation, Descartes mused about angels, but his philosophy gave them no home. He never said it outright, but the message was clear. In the universe of reason, witchcraft has no place. Across the Channel, Thomas Hobbes took an even bolder stance. A mechanistic materialist, Hobbes rejected spirits, demons, ghosts, all as products of the brain's illusions. But, and here's the paradox, Hobbes still believed witches should be punished, not for supernatural power, but for believing they possessed it. Because belief itself, he said, could destabilize the social order. In Leviathan, he famously wrote, "Their witchcraft is no real power, but they are punished for believing it." Terrifying? Yes, but logical from Hobbes's perspective. John Locke said almost nothing, which, in a sense, was the point. He argued that humans are in radical ignorance about angels, demons, spirits, and therefore should build no superstition upon them. Silence here was a philosophical weapon. Baruch Spinoza, however, wielded a sword. In his universe, there is one substance, God, or nature. Everything else is a mode, including us. There is no room for demons, no room for angels, not even room for Satan. Spinoza called the concept of the devil a contradiction, a being who would cease to exist because it hates the very perfection that sustains existence. He dismissed biblical demons as metaphors used by Jesus to communicate with simple people. To Spinoza, witchcraft wasn't false. It was incoherent, a category error. But philosophy wasn't the only force pushing back. In the Basque region, between 1609 and 1614, children began confessing en masse to being dragged to witches' Sabbaths. Panic erupted, executions multiplied. The Spanish Inquisition sent Alonso de Salazar Frias to investigate. He interviewed thousands. He reviewed confessions. He visited alleged sites of Sabbaths at night. He tested claims, cross-examined witnesses, and demanded evidence. His conclusion, written in 1612, shattered everything. None of it was real. Not the Sabbaths, not the flights, not the pacts. He found contradictions everywhere. Fabrications, coercion, childhood imagination, amplified by fear, and confessions produced by terror of torture. Salazar's report ended the Spanish witch trials. Never underestimate the power of a skeptical mind. As the 17th century approached its end, one final voice rose above the noise: Balthasar Bekker. In 1695, his book, The World Bewitched, delivered the death blow to demonology. Bekker used Calvinist theology, Cartesian metaphysics, biblical analysis, and emerging science to argue that Satan is not a being, but a metaphor. Without Satan, there can be no pacts, no demonic magic, no witches. He argued that those who accused others of witchcraft should be punished themselves. For this, Bekker was tried, excommunicated, and ostracized. But his ideas won. After Bekker, the intellectual defense of witch trials collapsed. Reason finally extinguished the flame of the pyre. And so we arrive at the lesson. Philosophical modernity was not born gently. It emerged between screams and sermons, between torture chambers and lecture halls, between the printing press and the stake. Most philosophers were skeptical. Few spoke publicly. Fewer still risked their lives to defend reason against hysteria. But the witch trials teach us something urgent. Fear can masquerade as piety. Panic can dress itself as morality. And entire societies can become convinced that imagination is truth and cruelty is justice. And today, we are not immune. We have seen satanic panics rise again in new forms with new symbols. The witch changes. The fear does not. The responsibility of the thoughtful mind remains to see, to understand, to question, to resist the seduction of simple answers to complex anxieties. History is not past, history is instruction, and if we fail to learn, we risk repeating the very horrors we think we have outgrown. Thank you for watching, where we explore the arcane threads of philosophy, religion, and the human mind.